All right, so here to help us figure out who knew what and when is Minnesota-based journalist who's been covering the fraud since, I believe, 2018, if I have that correctly, Liz. But it's Liz Collin. And I know that she's also spoken to a lot of people who've been hard to reach. We've asked for a lot of people out of Minnesota. You managed to accomplish getting in contact with these prosecutors. Let's talk about exactly what's going on. Fry, Omar, Ellison. How deep does this go into politics?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there is an overlap with plenty of Democrats in power in Minnesota with all of this. It was the spring of 2021 when the raids involved with the $250 million fraud scheme tied to Feeding Our Future was first exposed. Even before that, though, you're right. There was a suspected $100 million fraud tied to overbilling at dozens of Somali-owned daycare sites in Minnesota. That was making news back then. So the question of who knew what and when, you laid that out. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, she held several events at the restaurant named in the Feeding Our Future fraud, including hosting her congressional win in 2018 at that very restaurant. So she knew one of the owners very well. Salim Saeed is his name, who has since been convicted. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry's senior policy aide, Abdi Nur Salah, also entered a guilty plea. He was tied to the case. Campaign donations from some of the defendants in Feeding Our Future eventually returned, as you mentioned, to Jacob Fry, Attorney General Keith Ellison, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. But you're right, I sat down with the lead prosecutor in the case, Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, talked to him months ago, and I asked him, will we see any of these political leaders indicted? At the time, he said he could not comment on future indictments, but even back then, the feds made it very clear that it seemed that these cases were still wide open. And now we're hearing about multiple social programs in Minnesota. And these investigations seem to be wide open at this case. And I think this federal spotlight certainly is helping at this moment, Will.
Okay, let's explore really quickly together, Liz, the questions of could and did. What I mean by that is we have audio of Keith Ellison. And as you know, Keith Ellison having a conversation with many of the people involved in this program wherein he seems to be suggesting that he'll get into any type of investigators off their back. Like if there's any holdup in some of the money going to their programs that were fraudulent, he'll grease the wheels, he'll figure out how to keep it going. They were complaining that people were starting to step in and stop the flow of funds. And Ellison seemed to be saying, well, where, how, I'll figure it out. So the question is could and did. Could this have been to this scale without all of these politicians knowing about it? And did they know about it?
It seems at this point, Will, hard to believe that someone did not know about this. You have a state senator, Omar Fateh, celebrating the fact that the money kept flowing. You have a city council member in Minneapolis, also part of that celebration that was actually held. It's on video. There are recordings of that as well. And our
Greg kicks off the show with booming applause and his trademark energetic entrance, instantly pulling the audience into the moment. He launches into a rapid-fire flow of jokes, effortlessly jumping from political figures to pop culture references. As the crowd reacts, you can feel the rhythm of the monologue locking in, Greg setting the comedic tempo for the entire night. His quick wit, sarcastic tone, and confident delivery establish that tonight's show is going to be loud, sharp, and unapologetically edgy.
Recording dates back years at this point, going over that celebration that took place, unless none of these people, which I find it very hard to believe, are not talking to each other at all. And now you also have these whistleblowers that have come forward recently saying that they went to Governor Tim Walz 7 years ago when he first came into office, and they wanted to bring these red flags to his attention, and they say that they were met with silence. So we're seeing that now on Medicaid funding perhaps being cut if Walz doesn't take this more seriously, according to that letter that was sent from the federal government on Friday. But we have multi-billions of dollars in fraud in Minnesota. And again, this has been ongoing for years. So just on a personal level, I've been a reporter for 20 plus years now. At this point, I find it really hard to believe that someone at the top did not know something.
Well, I have no doubt, Liz, that you'll be the first to know if that prosecutor, Thompson, comes back and says you will see a Ellison or a Fry or an Omar in cuffs. You'll be the first to know. So we hope you'll come back here and let us know about that, Liz Collins.
Absolutely. Thanks, Will.
Let's get to Republican John Barrasso of the great state of Wyoming, Senate Majority Whip and member of the Foreign Relations and Finance Committees. Great to have you on the program today. I want to talk about what's at stake with what's happening in Minnesota. You've got a former vice presidential candidate who's being looked at this, the governor of that state, Tim Walz. And you've got Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and others.
The jokes keep coming, each one landing faster than the last. Greg pokes fun at Kamala Harris's comment about having a marble bust, mocks Joe Biden with physical humor, and even riffs on a strange Netflix film about a transgender minor. The punchlines escalate, blending political commentary with absurdity. The audience erupts with laughter as Greg moves effortlessly through each target, hitting that classic late-night blend of satire, exaggeration, and playful meanness. His pacing is tight, and his delivery gets more animated with each punchline.
Others being looked at. What's at stake here?
Well, the fraud and corruption in Minnesota, and especially among those elected officials, is staggering. And as you said on Friday, Harris, that's just the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing right now. What we're seeing is something that's criminal, it is massive, and it is sleazy. And it looks to me that the officials in Minnesota were well aware of it. They looked the other way because they needed the votes of a certain community there. It does look like it involves the governor, who's a Democrat, who was the nominee for vice president of the United States. And it also looks like money has been funneled not just to criminals, but also overseas and possibly also to terrorist organizations. And what's making this so sleazy is so much of this money, they did it under the guise of trying to help children and children with autism. They didn't care at all about that. They just wanted more names to put under more fraudulent documents. And then the people in Minnesota, it looks like, rubber stamped it. The money started to flow, and they never looked back. This was set up to defraud the American taxpayers. And I'll tell you, we need to go after all of these folks who need to be held accountable for what I believe is criminal behavior.
You know, Senators, you were talking about what was happening. Our detail today that we're drilling down on, one of two of them, is the food programs. I mean, you've got a congresswoman on Capitol Hill right now, Ilhan Omar, whose people in...
Greg dives into another set of heavier, more outrageous jokes, this time aimed at Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom, and a Jeopardy! Champion caught in a secret camera scandal. He twists uncomfortable headlines into comedic gold, adding dramatic expressions and vocal changes to amplify the humor. Every news story becomes a setup, and Greg turns each punchline into a moment that takes the audience from shock to laughter. He pushes boundaries without hesitation, creating the kind of edgy comedic tension his audience expects.
Her very own staff, one of whom has already committed and is convicted because they confessed to doing this, that they took $2 million in food that was supposed to help people during COVID and used it for personal benefit. I mean, this is a big deal, reaching all the way to Capitol Hill. What are the ramifications there?
Well, there needs to be legal proceedings. You got to go after these people who I think intentionally refused to follow the law, and the officials in Minnesota really didn't go ahead and try to enforce the law. And we've seen this also in Medicaid there in Minnesota with fraud there. We've seen it with the food programs. We've seen it with welfare. Apparently, they were trying to sign up so many people they ran out of names. So went to a website, www.randomnames.com, to make up names. And the money was so big, we understand that some of it went to buy BMWs, Mercedes-Benz. Some of it even went to buy real estate overseas. But it does look to me, Harris, and I think you had Kim Strassel on last week, so many of these government programs are just set up to be taken advantage of, and the Democrats seem to want to do that. They don't look for accountability. We're seeing it right now with Obamacare and what the Democrats are trying to do with these additional Biden bonus COVID subsidies. And as the Wall Street Journal pointed out today, you know, Obamacare is a mecca for fraud.
The monologue then veers into even more absurd territory. Greg revisits the long-running Ilhan Omar rumor about her alleged marriage situation, turning it into a series of family-themed punchlines. He then shifts to the bizarre claim that Eminem once asked Kate Winslet for an extremely personal favor, transforming an odd celebrity anecdote into a perfectly timed comedic bit. The room erupts as Greg heightens the ridiculousness, proving his ability to take even the strangest stories and make them feel like part of one long, hilarious thread.
Well, look, I'm looking at my notes here because I know we have a bit of a quote to speak to what you're saying. I mean, the Medicare, Medicaid is so important, that, as well as the Senate is set to take a test vote Thursday on this part of it. The Wall Street Journal editorial board writes that those subsidies are, quote, a mecca for fraud and ripe for gaming. Here's part of it. The GAO last fall began an undercover test into which it submitted insurance applications for fictitious individuals to the federal Obamacare exchange and insurance brokers. Nearly all of its invented people were able to enroll in subsidized plans despite submitting false or no records to verify their identities and incomes. Senator, as we learn more about this, the American people, you used one word, but they've been ripped off and they cannot be reimbursed.
Yeah. And Obamacare continues to fail the American people. I'm a doctor, practiced medicine for 24 years. I want people to get the care they need from a doctor they choose at lower costs. Obamacare has made that essentially impossible. And so the Democrats realized the failures of Obamacare, so they propped it up with big subsidy checks directly to insurance companies. Doesn't go through people, doesn't go through consumers. It goes right from the federal government to the insurance companies. And look, you know, Obama promised that premiums would drop by $2,500 a family. Instead, they have doubled, and the insurance company loves getting those.
Next, Greg transitions to the main story. A New Yorker article explaining why some liberals are planning to flee the U.S. because of Donald Trump. He mocks the fear-driven mindset behind it and zeroes in on the irony of people escaping authoritarianism by moving to the Netherlands, a literal monarchy with a king, a crown, and centuries of tradition. Greg highlights the contradiction with exaggerated outrage and sarcastic disbelief, carving out long comedic beats as he dismantles the logic behind the story. His jokes about European culture and American dramatics get bigger reactions with every line.
Checks, their stocks are up 500 to 1,000%. So Obamacare was never affordable. And what the Democrats are trying to do now is saying, oh my gosh, we need to keep these COVID subsidies going, these added bonus subsidies, and they want to send another $100 billion directly from the federal treasury to the insurance companies. And Republicans are saying, look, American consumers ought to have a say in that. If we're going to send money, it ought to go to families who they can make the decision of what works best for them. Give them the opportunity to make the insurance companies compete by lowering the prices, by offering other opportunities for insurance that works for that specific family, not the straitjacket that is the one-size-fits-all of Obamacare.
And look, the shutdown that Democrats perpetrated on this entire nation and put people even in a bigger financial hole to be able to afford Obamacare when it does go up, unless they can agree with Republicans to do something to actually reform the system. I mean, that is even more unforgivable on the parts of Democrats, what they've done with that shutdown and still didn't fix the problem. Great to have you on the program, and thank you for all of your years as a doctor. It really played a role today, as I'm sure it did for many of your patients for years. Good to see you, Senator.
Harris. Great to be with you.
You got it.
Greg then breaks down what he sees as the real issue. These people aren't fleeing Donald Trump. They're fleeing their own anxiety, media addiction, and imagined fears. He jokes that they can leave the country, but their obsession travels with them because the real battlefield exists inside their heads. Using metaphors, comparisons, and visual gags, he paints a picture of people dragging emotional baggage like carry-on luggage they can't check in. The theme becomes clear. You can run from a country, but you can't run from yourself. The reflection is comedic, but also hits deeper commentary.
Terrorists in her native Somalia.
If there was a linkage in that the money that they had stolen going to terrorism, then that is a failure of the FBI and our court system in not figuring that out and basically charging them.
Fox News contributor Mary Catherine Ham joins us now. It is, interesting that she doesn't mention all the associates connected to her campaign worker, and places where she hosted her campaign parties at as well, MK.
Yeah,
there also wasn't a denial. That
Right.
felt like sort of a tell to me. I think she knows much more about all of this than she's let on the whole time. As you allude to, she has plenty of associates, close friends, allies who were enriching themselves off of $250 million defrauded from one program alone, maybe $1 billion in the state. And this is money that would have gone to children being fed, the homeless being housed, and did not. That's what the compassion adds up to. But the fact is that a lot of people were making a ton of money off of this, and she just wants to lay it off on someone else. But ma'am, you're in charge. You're in charge of the district. You're in charge of making federal law and should be interested in checking where federal money is going, especially when it's supposed to go to the compassionate services that you're supposed to be all about. But that's not the situation here, and I think it's true for...
The panel steps in and the energy shifts into a group riffing session. Each guest adds their spin, cracking jokes about therapy addiction, celebrity dramatics, and overly privileged people making dramatic statements like, "I must leave America." They tease Rosie O'Donnell's long-standing feud with Trump, joke about overreactions on social media, and laugh at the idea of treating political news like a psychological emergency. The panel brings multiple comedic styles together, sarcastic, observational, and exaggerated, creating a dynamic comedic back and forth that builds on Greg's monologue.
Tim Walz, as well as Keith Ellison, who's on audio, on tape, saying to the folks who defrauded Feeding Our Future, saying, "I'll help you out with this. Let's get you out of this investigation." Like, these people were in on it.
And that is the major part of this. Tim Walz, they went after the whistleblowers, and I think that's part of the investigation I'm waiting to unfold. Meanwhile, also happening today, Jasmine Crockett is expected to make an announcement as she weighs a last-minute Texas Senate run after the Supreme Court allowed Texas to use the new congressional district map. That means she's going to be drawn out of her district. They used to allow that to happen with Eddie Bernice Johnson, but they decided to redraw it, so she won't have a seat anymore. Colin Allred is getting out of the race now. What do you make of these developments?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, I think Crockett would be a dream for Texas Republicans who can paint her as far, far, far too left for Texas. She was running in a D plus 30 points district, like, so a very, very, very Democratic district. And she's really good at the showmanship part. All of politics is a reality show now, so she's going to show up at like 11 a.m. this morning and be like, will I or won't I? She will. And the problem for Democrats is this was already a crowded primary with a couple of like pretty good moderate signaling people, and she's going to jump in here and be not at all moderate signaling and probably cause a problem for Democrats. But she'll raise a lot of money and make a lot of...
For the finale, Greg points out the biggest contradiction. These people could easily move to deep blue cities within the U.S. if they want to live in liberal comfort zones, but they avoid them because of high crime, high costs, and collapsing quality of life, all caused by the same politics they support. Greg uses the irony as a major comedic payoff, delivering punchlines about taxes, bad governance, and media-driven panic. He ends with a final sharp jab at Rosie O'Donnell, tying the entire segment together with a strong comedic closer that leaves the audience laughing.